Hello all, I'm Kel Kidman and welcome to Breaking on the Daily, where today we're going to begin with silver, because currently there is a silver shortage going on, with many, because Reddit and Wall Street Bets, I think, is buying into it on huge, massive scales. Now, this is an interesting story on its own, because, but more than that, I think this story illustrates a problem with something like silver. Now, you'll see all over the place, particularly on financial boards and stuff like that, people who will decry lots of different currencies as fake money because, oh, silver and gold, those are the real money. And I fail to understand what these people's conception of currency is. Because, according to everything that I can discern, currency is simply a medium of exchange. All it is essentially the monetary equivalent of a language. A dollar is different from a euro and all of these sorts of things. They have their different languages and values, but they're all languages. And the same goes with gold and that sort of thing. And people will claim that, no, because the US dollar is fiat, but gold's real money, it's not fiat. I don't think these people understand the nature of what fiat is, because all currencies, no matter what they are, no matter how they're done, whether crypto, minerals, or paper, they're all fiat. Because all fiat means is that something has value because it has been declared so. Essentially, because people believe that something has value, it has value. Now, that applies to everything. That applies to gold, that applies to silver, that applies to the US dollar, that applies to every cryptocurrency under the sun. It applies to all of these things. But of course, all of this sort of stuff gets ignored by people, particularly those who wish to decry cryptocurrencies as fool's gold or something like that. But I think people miss a lot about a certain problem about silver, particularly about using it as an everyday currency, rather than some sort of investment. And that is, silver is traded at about $28 an ounce as of right now. It may be trading extra, more, or less, but the point still stands. It trades at $28 an ounce. And to put that in perspective, it's about a US quarter dollar. When it was back in silver, I think it is around that size. So a quarter is $28. Now, here's the problem if we try to apply that to an entire currency. Because, first of all, silver is a very rare resource. There is only so much silver in the world, and compared to lots of other different sorts of materials, silver has remained relatively stable in how much of it exists. That's part of why it's actually good as a as a currency. It's why it's good as a currency as opposed to something like steel. Because it has a relatively stable base of material upon which to actually build from, its value does not have any sort of predisposition to suddenly tank. It doesn't have a predisposition to inflation. But a problem emerges with all physical currencies, and particularly mineral currencies like silver or gold that are based on their rarity. And that is, you can only divide it so much. It isn't infinitely divisible. And because it isn't infinitely divisible, and such small quantities of silver couldn't possibly be physical and used in a regular context, because of that, what ends up happening is that your currency loses some of its edge. It loses its ability to delineate between particular sets of values. It can't determine between something like a bushel of hay and a dozen eggs. It can't determine between those things because the smallest determination we have accounts for both of these things. And to understand this entirely, let's put this into perspective. If the quarter dollar still had silver in it, as some people continue to try and push, and into now, and it still has the same amount of silver in it, and all the quarter dollars are silver, and everything around it has its relative values preserved. The penny 1/25th of that thing would be the equivalent of $1. Now, there's a problem in that, because at that point, around $1, at that point, you would only be able to delineate between the value and price of things between dollars. Essentially, if something is $1 more than another, well, then you can delineate from it, but you don't have anything you don't have anything any more granular than that. And that becomes a problem, because you end up rounding up your currency and making things that should be worth, $1.20, suddenly they're worth $2, because they're not going to be sold at $1. That might make them being sold at a loss. So everything's going to be rounded up. That becomes a problem. This, as opposed to cryptocurrency, and this is where I think cryptocurrency's real value comes from, cryptocurrency doesn't have this problem. You can divide Bitcoin by as much as you want. You can divide it down so low that it's like 100,000th of a cent in value. And it's fine with that. That's how divisible it is. That's why you see these huge, massive numbers when you see how much Bitcoin someone has, in terms of their decimal points. It's because you can have such a particular level of Bitcoin that you just can't have with silver. And this has an advantage in economics. And it has an advantage particularly for everyday currencies, because while this gets rid of the idea that while Bitcoin cannot be inflated, or at least it cannot be because it has a limited supply of Bitcoin, there are only a limited number of Bitcoin in the world, it does not have the same problem as silver in that it is too blunt of an object to act as an everyday currency. It can act as an everyday currency by simply lowering how much you're actually spending in Bitcoin, however much you need. It can be any particular level of Bitcoin you want, though the numbers can be a bit wild and out there. And that can be rectified through simply using other cryptocurrencies that are not valued as highly as Bitcoin is. And I think that's the huge advantage for Bitcoin. Because, of course, there is the other problem of currencies, most currencies, other sorts of paper currencies, the fiat currencies, as the silver acolytes will call it. They have the tendency to inflate, particularly when they are done by central banks. And that is a reasonable concern. However, and this is something where I differ from certain people, inflation is not inherently bad, at least not in measured ways. Let me explain. Because economies grow, and because our economy has grown so much over the past century, if our currency did not inflate at all, it would have the same problem as silver currently does have. And nowadays, they would have the exact same problem, where our currency, because there is so little of it, in comparison to how much our economy has grown over the past century, so if we take, the amount of currency in 1900, stop all inflation whatsoever, don't deflate anything, assume that nothing gets lost in couch cushions or anything, and just assume that that amount of currency is what is always available, that currency is going to grow in value over time because the economy has grown. And because the medium of exchange has to accommodate a larger pool of resources and transactions. And thus it becomes a problem later on, over into the present day, if we were to continue to have no inflation, that there simply wouldn't be enough currency for everyone to go around. It would become a very blunt object being valued very highly. It would pay for a whole lot, which sounds nice. But what would end up happening is that the relative delineations of what our currency means become foggy and mostly meaningless in a lot of ways. A penny would be worth however much, let's just assume it's worth as much as in the silver example, because you have pretty much the exact same idea there. It's worth $1. That's pretty insane. And a quarter's $25. It becomes a very cumbersome way to actually do things. You'd have to carry around a whole lot of pennies and coins as opposed to being able to carry around a whole bunch of bills. Of course, credit cards and debit cards would still exist, and that would kind of rectify the problem, but you'd still have the problem of the currency not being divisible enough. And that's really the advantage of cryptocurrency. And really the problem with silver there is it really is just a really blunt tool. I'm not knocking it, of course. I do quite like silver as an investment. It is quite a good thing, obviously. It certainly has a place. But I don't think its places as an everyday currency, as some acolytes will try to do, and cryptocurrency bashers will try to do. Anyway, on to our next story, and this one is kind of strange. So, the Never Trump Lincoln Project founder, John Weaver, has been accused of sending provocative messages to young men. Now, I'm not particularly interested in the headline of the story in this case, because, frankly, I've known about these accusations for months. These accusations have been public. I think I remember seeing them before the election even happened. So this isn't actually surprising to me to see that these accusations continue to exist. Rather, I want to talk about what the Lincoln Project's response to this was, because it is, in a word, baffling to see exactly how much these people are just utterly incompetent. And to get at that point, I'm just going to read out the second paragraph, because the first paragraph's just mealy muff whining about him, calling him a liar and all that sort of stuff, just essentially condemning him, whatever. The second part is where it gets really baffling. So, the totality of his deceptions are beyond anything any of us could have imagined, and we are absolutely shocked and sickened by it. Like so many, we have been betrayed and deceived by John Weaver. We are grateful beyond words that at no time John Weaver was in the physical presence of any member of the Lincoln Project. Now, I hope you can see the problem there, because apparently the founder of the Lincoln Project, the co-founder of the Lincoln Project, never met anyone involved in a physical way. Apparently, they were just talking on Twitter the entire time and did all of this digitally. Am I supposed to believe that? Or how incompetently does this thing have to be run that you never met your founder or one of your founders? How was that a thing? Now, of course, the rest of the second half of the statement is an out-and-out lie. These allegations have been public for months, all right? This is all spurred on the most recent rounds of this by a New York Times article by the same guy who's been exposing this sort of stuff for months on Twitter. And these allegations have been public. Some of them have been tweeted directly at Lincoln Project members, so they knew about it. They've known about it for months. They're only whining about it now, all right? I'm not saying that they're necessarily evil in this case. I don't know. But why lie about it? I mean, you could have said, yeah, we were doing an investigation into this for months, and, we discovered that this was all real, and la, 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 la. You could have done that, but you didn't do that. You feigned ignorance. You pretended as though the New York Times article was the first time you ever heard about this, despite the fact that this has been brewing under the surface for months. Seriously, I saw some of the initial tweets about this. It is baffling, and the guy who actually wrote the article stated as well that it is an out-and-out lie, because he would know, and he said that certain people who he had contact with were saying, yeah, they knew, and they were all super dismissive of it, essentially. Yeah, it's just. Man, this is... But I still can't get past. You guys never met your co-founder in public. I don't get it. I don't get it. It does not make sense to me. I don't know. I think I have to move on. Because, that's sort of the thing I wanted to talk about with that story. I don't really care for the actual allegations themselves. I don't really care. They may be true, they may be not. I have no idea. They seem to be true. He seems to be being thrown out under the bus by literally everyone, and it seems to be credible enough. Of course, has a man in the court of law. I don't know. I can't be definitive about these sorts of things because I don't intend to, I don't intend to be definitive about things I don't know. Simple as that. Though the Lincoln Project's statement, regardless of whether these allegations are true or not, is just completely baffling. But to move on to our next story, and this one's kind of a disgusting one, like really disgusting. And that is a popular fertility app is being sued over allegedly sharing data, personal data, with Chinese firms. And this should be worrying to everyone. I mean, China has been invading upon everyone's privacy for as long as we can possibly. Now, I don't know exactly what they're planning to do with all of this data. I don't know if they're planning to do anything with this data. But simply knowing that they have so much access and ability to just do it at the drop of a hat, and any sort of a company can just get caught up into this almost instantaneously. And by the way, for those who are like, oh, but it's going to particular firms that are privately owned. It's not going to the government. What are you talking about? Guys, by Chinese law, in Chinese law, any data collected by these sorts of firms can be accessed by the Chinese Communist Party. All of it. Not to mention the fact that every private business in China is functionally owned by the Chinese Communist Party. They just allow certain amounts of granularity there and allow people to sort of open up businesses from the ground up where they think it's effective and still gels with their mission. Functionally, in terms of actual ownership, despite you might have the ownership deed in China for whatever business you're running, but the guys who really control what's going on, the guys who are in control of everything that's done in that firm, is the Chinese Communist Party. Yes, you'll be allowed to control certain things that mean nothing to the Chinese Communist Party. You might be able to say, well, change certain workplace policies within a certain degree, so long as it doesn't go buff back on China. You might be able to change what particular products you're selling. You might even be able to compete with certain other Chinese companies. But functionally, you'll never be able to criticize the Chinese government. You'll never be able to do anything that is advantageous to the Chinese government. If you're found to do anything that can even be construed as not advantageous to the Chinese government, you're out. Depending on which person you're actually going up against, you might not be able to go up against them, period. You might be able to just be kicked out on a whim by the Chinese government. They can come in and break down the door and take your property whenever they want. That's how that works. It's not actual ownership. It's not ownership. Not in any way that matters, all right? So for people who continue to defend China and other systems of the like as not actually violating their people's property rights because they have a piece of paper that says that they're the owner, yeah, you guys can all go away. Stop making this argument. Bye. Just stop it. All right, you're not convincing. You're not convincing, and you're liars in a lot of cases. Just stop it. And it's a similar tactic to what you'll see with sort of the more underground sorts of socialist movements. It is still socialist in nature because socialism simply means the public ownership of property, and since the public is the one controlling the state, the public and the state functionally indifferent, functionally the same thing. Since the state is controlling the property, though they don't have the deed, they're still in control. They're still in control of the means of production. Functionally, they are still socialists. People who call them capitalists are morons. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what the word socialism means. They don't know what the word capitalism means. They don't know any of these sorts of things. Of course, you see this a lot from either Marxists or Marxist sympathizers. Many people who believe that Marxists are the only sorts of socialists that exist, or that Marxism created socialism or something of that like. It's not true. Socialism is a very broad idea, and Marxism is a particular scent within that broad idea. Because socialism as a term and as an economic idea exists before Marx, long before Marx, centuries, thousands of years before Marx. It could be argued that to a certain extent feudalism is kind of a proto-socialism. Not really, but kind of. Functionally, the state still had control of a lot of the means of production under feudalism, but we're getting off into the weeds. We are really getting off the weeds. Because, really, this story is disgusting. It is disgusting to see that a fertility app is selling data to the Chinese Communist Party. It is disgusting to see that. And I don't expect any backlash of this from Joe Biden or the like. I don't expect this from Beijing Biden, Resident Biden. Quite wonderful term I heard from Matt Walsh, actually. Resident Biden. That's a pretty good one. But Beijing Biden's not going to go up against this. He's not going to actually say, go to town on China. All right? That wasn't going to happen. And it's funny to see all of these Biden voters that are so disappointed in him, that don't expect him to do exactly what everyone was telling them he would do. It is amazing. It is amazing. If you still have a Twitter account, if you still look at Twitter at all, go to the Biden L's account, Biden voters posting their L's online. Wonderful account, filled with content of just people being incredibly stupid and not understanding what they're voting for, and then having it come back to bite them. It is quite poetic. And all of you who voted for Biden, you deserve it. You deserve it. All right, people who didn't vote for Biden, you don't deserve it. But, people who did vote for Biden, you deserve it. But on to our last story. And this is actually an editorial from the Washington Examiner. The headline is, "Purging Liz Cheney from the GOP is wrong-headed." No. Because here's the fact of the matter. Liz Cheney, and I think this is something that gets missed by a lot of people. Liz Cheney, we're not purging her from the Republican Party. We're not purging the mono-party folks, the rhinos, from the Republican Party. No, they purge themselves from the Republican Party. Because you'll see in this article, them fawn over Liz Cheney. Oh my gosh, she's so good at messaging. Look at all of these things she did. Look at every single time she talked. And she said, really good things, guys. Really conservative things, guys. Oh, yeah? Show me some action. Yeah, show me where she voted for anything that actually mattered. Show me when she voted for conservative principles when it was controversial. Show me where she did that. You can't. And they didn't even try. And the reason they didn't even try was because, it doesn't exist. Liz Cheney's a rhino. And functionally, a rhino is not a Republican. Something that's misunderstood greatly by all these people is, I don't want to purge the Republican Party. I don't want a purity spiral. That's why I'm not interested in, say, getting rid of Mike Lee, who didn't vote to object on January 6th. That's why I'm not interested in getting rid of a lot of those sorts of senators. Because Mike Lee, I can still trust him to actually vote for conservative, populist ideas when it comes down to it. When it comes down to voting for policy, I can still trust him. All right? I am interested in getting rid of, say, Mitt Romney or, say, Liz Cheney, because those two cannot be trusted to do that. They are not Republicans. They have purged themselves from the party because they are not representative of any of our interests. They don't want to represent your interests, except for when they're talking. You see, they're messaging so well. And you want to get rid of her for voting for an unconstitutional and completely unjustified impeachment? Well, 77% or 57% of Americans support that idea. Oh, really? According to what? Polling. Oh, you mean that thing that has been historically inaccurate over the past year? That thing that has been so ridiculously wrong that it is complained when certain other pollsters that are actually somewhere near the mark were biased towards Republicans. All right? They were so wrong that every single toss-up election in the House went to Republicans. Every single one. All 27. That's who you want to rest your laurels on? Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. That has about as much efficacy as pointing to computer models for your evidence for your policy. Yeah, that has about as much efficacy as going into some sort of room full of Democrats and saying, who doesn't like the orange man? That's about the amount of efficacy you're going to see from those sorts of areas. All right, and they'll say things like, oh, reasonable minds can differ on impeachment. That's not true. That's not true at all. Anyone who is reasonable can recognize that, first of all, Trump was not inciting anything. He was just saying, they complain about, of course, his post-election rhetoric, because he was complaining about obviously suspicious crap. Oh, wow. He was complaining about things being suspicious, and then no one looking into it, ever, at all. Yeah, oh man, that's so egregious. I can't imagine anyone doing that before. Oh wait, Hillary Clinton did that for 4 years, complaining about Russia. The difference being, as far as we've seen, one has an investigation that turned up nothing, and one has been refused to be investigated by literally everyone. Oh wow, that's a real sure sign of consistency. That's a real sign of reasonableness. Yes, sure. Utterly ridiculous. And this coward, by the way, this coward who wrote the Washington Examiner piece, refused to put himself in the byline. It just says by Washington Examiner. It's not like he even put his name in the byline, because he knows what he's saying is nonsense. He knows he's going to get backlash for it, because this is utter insanity. Voting to impeach a president because he incited violence in a speech in which he sounded like a hippie, in which he was calling for peace all the way through, and later on went to condemn the violence that occurred, is stupid. It's dumb. It's not something you do when you are being reasonable. It's what you do when you're being a rhino. And especially for all of the Republicans and Democrats that voted for this impeachment sham, this conviction, particularly in the Senate, as, oh no, this is totally constitutional, this is totally fine. These 45 over in the, no, this is obviously unconstitutional. Those are the guys that we can keep. And I think an important thing that gets missed, and why I'm talking about why we don't want to purge everyone, we're not purity spiraling, it's because those 45, most of them can stay. Probably all of them can stay for all I care. Who I care about are the Republicans who voted for it being constitutional, because the people are obviously rhinos and obviously not interested in anything approaching, say, constitutional governments or something like that. Any sort of actual action that matters. They aren't interested in truly representing their constituents' interests. But on top of that, our attacks, and this is what I've talked about with regard to third parties as well, they need to be deliberate and they need to be targeted, because we're not going to get a full purge of the entire Republican Party in 2 years. It's not going to happen. You're not going to get a full third-party takeover of the entire electorate over 2 years. It's not going to happen. But you know what you can do? You can primary a few rhinos. You can make a few third-party candidates win in particular states. You can win a state. All right? You can change stuff. But it's not going to happen all at once. And if you try to make a change all at once, as a forewarning to those who are trying, you're going to fail. And you're going to get nothing done, as opposed to getting something done. That's the problem with a lot of these sorts of extremely rash actions that you've been seeing from a lot of the populists as of recent. Of course, not everyone. Lots of people are being reasonable, but, there is that contingent that exists that wants to burn everything down all at once, or tear everything down all at once, and all that sort of stuff. Like, no, that's not how you get anything done. You go brick by brick, you go stone by stone, and eventually you win. That's how that works. All right? I think that's where I'm going to leave you, because that seems like a good ending to end off on. Wherever you are, if you've made it to the end of this video, subscribe for more. If you're on YouTube, I would suggest go elsewhere, but if you're on any of my alt-tech platforms, just stay where you're comfortable. I really do want to see you, I want to see all of these sorts of places growing. But this has been Breaking on the Daily. I'm Kel Kidman, and I'm out.